I didn't think twice when my son asked for a copy of my house key. He said it was just in case of emergencies, in case something ever happened to me. I trusted him. Of course I did. He's my son. But 3 weeks later, I walked into my own home, and something felt different. At first, I couldn't explain it. Then I noticed what she had done, and in that moment, I realized I had made a mistake I couldn't undo. My name is not important. What is important is that I am a woman who has lived long enough to know the difference between a quiet house and an empty one. And on that afternoon, a Tuesday, I remember because I always do my grocery shopping on Tuesdays, my house felt both at the same time. I had lived in that house for 31 years. My husband Raymond and I bought it the summer our son Daniel turned 4. It was nothing fancy. A 2-story colonial with a leaky basement and a backyard that needed more work than either of us was prepared for. But Raymond loved that yard. He spent every spare Saturday out there with his gloves and his wheelbarrow, and by the time Daniel was old enough to run through the grass barefoot, it had become something beautiful. Raymond passed 9 years ago. Heart attack. Sudden. No warning. One morning he was sitting across from me at the breakfast table with his coffee and his crossword puzzle, and that afternoon he was gone. And the house, that house, became the one thing that still held his shape. The dent in the armchair where he always sat, the hooks by the back door where he hung his garden gloves, the smell of the cedar chest in our bedroom that I have never once moved. I say all of this because I need you to understand what that house meant to me. It wasn't just wood and brick and windows. It was every year of my adult life. It was the place where Daniel took his first steps, where we celebrated Christmases and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday dinners that felt like nothing at the time, but feel like everything now. I was not living in a house. I was living inside my own history. Daniel is a good man. I believe that. I have to believe that. He is patient and steady, and he has his father's eyes, that particular shade of brown that looks green in certain light. He works in commercial real estate, does well for himself, calls me every Sunday morning without fail. For a long time, that Sunday call was the highlight of my week. He met Renata about 4 years ago. She was a colleague of a colleague, introduced at some work event I never got the full story on. He brought her to Thanksgiving that first year, polite, put together, wearing a cashmere sweater the color of autumn leaves. She brought a bottle of good wine and complimented my roast and made easy conversation. I liked her well enough, but there was something. I don't know how to explain it without sounding like a jealous old woman, which I am determined not to be. It wasn't anything she said. It was more the way she looked at things, the way her eyes would move around a room, not casually, but deliberately, like she was taking inventory. I noticed it first in my kitchen, when she picked up the ceramic salt shaker I've had since the 1980s and turned it over in her hands and said, "Isn't this charming?" in a tone that made me feel like something in a museum. They married 2 years ago. A beautiful wedding, outdoors, late September, the kind of day that feels like a gift. I cried during the vows, the good kind of crying. I told myself I was being foolish for the small unease I felt. I told myself Renata was my daughter-in-law now, and that family is what you make it. The key happened about 8 months after the wedding. Daniel came by on a Sunday afternoon, unannounced, which was unusual. He had coffee with me in the kitchen and talked about work and the traffic on the highway. And then, almost as an afterthought, he said he'd been thinking about how I lived alone and how anything could happen, and wouldn't it make him feel better to have a spare key? "Just in case, Mum," he said. "You know, if you ever fall or something, I'd feel better knowing I could get in." It made sense. Of course it made sense. I'm 68 years old, and I live alone in a 2-story house. My neighbor Helen checks on me sometimes, but she's not family. I handed Daniel the spare from the hook by the back door, the hook where Raymond used to hang his garden gloves, and I didn't think another thing about it. The first thing I noticed was the throw blanket. It had been on the arm of the living room sofa for as long as I could remember. My mother made it, crocheted it herself, blue and white squares, when Daniel was a baby. It wasn't beautiful in any modern sense. The yarn had faded, and one corner had come a little loose over the years, but it was mine, and it was hers, and it lived on that sofa arm the way Raymond's gloves lived on that hook. It was folded and placed on the shelf in the hallway closet. I stood there looking at it for a long moment. I told myself I must have moved it and forgotten, I do forget things sometimes. Not badly, not worryingly, but enough that I second-guess myself more than I used to. I put the blanket back on the sofa arm and went to bed. 2 days later, the spice rack above the stove had been reorganized. I keep my spices alphabetically. It sounds fussy, but I've done it that way for 30 years, and it works for me. They were now grouped by type. Baking spices together, savory herbs together, everything neat and logical in a way that was not my logic. I told Daniel about it on Sunday. He laughed a little and said Renata had stopped by to drop something off, and she'd probably just been trying to help. You know how she is, he said, which I did not know exactly, but I let it go. I let it go because I told myself I was being oversensitive. An old woman alone in a big house, unused to having people rearrange her spice rack. It was nothing. It was kindness, maybe, or at least not malice. But then it kept happening. A dish towel set I'd had for years disappeared from the drawer and was replaced by a newer set, cream-coloured, monogrammed, folded in thirds the way they do in hotels. My old dish towels showed up in a paper bag on my back step, as though they'd been thrown away, but someone had reconsidered at the last minute. The mirror in the downstairs bathroom was rehung about 6 inches higher, which meant I had to stand on my toes to see my own face. A small thing, you might think, but it was my mirror, in my bathroom, in my house. I called Daniel. He was apologetic, he really was. He said Renata had been over helping with some things, that she had a good eye for home improvement, that he hoped I wasn't upset. She means well, Mom, he said. I asked him to please ask her not to come to my house without telling me first. He said, of course. Absolutely, he completely understood. For about 2 weeks, things were quiet. Then I came home from Helen's one afternoon and found Renata in my kitchen. She had a key. And she had let herself in, and she was standing at my kitchen counter with her laptop open and a measuring tape on the counter beside it. And she looked up when I came in and smiled like she had been expecting me. I was just taking some measurements, she said. I asked her what for. She said, very calmly, very pleasantly, that she and Daniel had been talking about the house and whether it might make sense to do a little updating. Daniel mentioned you might be thinking about downsizing at some point, she said. We just wanted to start thinking ahead. I had never said a word to Daniel about downsizing. Not one word. This was my home. I had no intention of going anywhere. I told her that clearly, and I told her calmly. And she smiled again, that same pleasant, patient smile, and said, of course, we're just trying to be helpful. After she left, I sat down at the kitchen table, and I stayed there for a long time. Something had shifted in me. I couldn't call it anger yet, exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when you realize you've been walking in one direction, certain of where you're going, and then you look up, and nothing looks the way it should. A disorientation that runs deeper than just being lost. I started paying closer attention. I bought a small notebook, and I began writing things down. Not because I thought I'd need evidence, not yet, but because I was beginning to doubt my own perceptions, and I needed something solid to hold on to. The spice rack, February 14th. The dish towels, February 22nd. Renata in the kitchen with the measuring tape, March 3rd. And if any of you are listening to this and thinking, that sounds like me, I've been writing things down too. I want you to know you are not alone. The fact that we have to write things down, that we have to document our own lives just to feel believed, that is its own kind of heartbreak. But do it. Write it all down. If this story is reaching you somehow, if it's finding its way to someone who needed to hear it, please know that matters to me. If you feel moved to like this video or share it somewhere, I'm grateful. Every person it reaches might be another woman sitting alone at her kitchen table, notebook open, wondering if she's imagining things. You're not. You're not imagining things. And you are not alone in this. If you want to tell me where you're watching from, I'd love to know. There's something about knowing someone is out there, in Iowa or Texas or somewhere in between, nodding along. It helps. I spoke to my sister Frances on the phone that evening. Frances is 4 years older than me and has never in her life been described as patient, which has always been exactly what I needed. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, Ellen, she's measuring your house. 2 words that hit me harder than anything I'd been willing to say to myself. She's measuring your house. I called my son the next morning, not on Sunday, on a Monday morning. which meant I was serious, and I think Daniel knew it before he even picked up. I told him I needed to talk to him, in person, soon. He came Thursday evening, alone. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd found his cereal bowls every morning for 14 years, and I put the notebook on the table between us. I walked him through every entry, every item moved, every change made without permission, the measuring tape, the conversation about downsizing that he had apparently been having with Renata behind my back, while telling me nothing. I watched his face. I know my son's face the way I know my own. He was uncomfortable, and he was sorry, and he was also, and this is the part that hurt most, not entirely surprised. He said they had just been talking, that Renata thought the house was getting to be a lot for me to manage alone, that they'd had some ideas, that nobody had made any decisions. I asked him directly, had he and Renata discussed the possibility of taking over this house, living in it, selling it, doing something with it? He didn't answer right away. That silence, that 3 seconds of silence was more than I could have been told by any words he might have chosen. He said finally that Renata had brought up the idea that it might be more practical for them to move into the house. It was bigger. It was in a good school district for when they had children. It made financial sense. And that I could move somewhere smaller, somewhere more manageable, that they would help me find a place. They would make sure I was taken care of. Taken care of. I am 68 years old. I cook my own meals and drive my own car and tend my own garden, the garden Raymond built, and I manage my own finances and my own health and my own life. And my son was sitting at my kitchen table, telling me his wife had a plan to move me out of my own home so they could move in, and he had been aware of this plan and said nothing. I don't have a word for what that feels like. I've been trying to find one for months. It isn't just betrayal, though it is that. It isn't just heartbreak, though it is that too. It is something quieter and colder, like standing at the window of your own house and suddenly understanding that someone has been watching it from the outside, measuring the rooms, calculating the value, deciding its future, your future, without ever once asking you what you wanted. I asked Daniel to leave. I didn't say it harshly. I just said I needed him to go and I needed to think. I sat in the armchair, Raymond's armchair, the one with the dent that holds the shape of him still, and I let myself feel all of it, the anger, the disbelief, the grief, because there is always grief involved when you learn that love has corners you hadn't seen. I thought about my grandmother's crocheted blanket on the closet shelf. I thought about standing on my toes to see my face in the mirror someone had moved 6 inches too high. And I thought about Raymond. Raymond would have put that key back on the hook, not to be cruel, never to be cruel, but because he understood something about this house that had nothing to do with square footage or school districts. He understood that a home is not a property. It is a continuation of the people who lived in it, and it does not become available just because the people who built it have grown old. I slept, eventually. Not well, but I slept. In the morning, I called a locksmith. I had all the locks changed. Front door, back door, basement door, the door to the garage. It took the locksmith an hour and 40 minutes, and it cost me $270, and it was the most clearly I had felt about anything in months. Then I called my attorney. I've had the same attorney for 22 years, a woman named Patricia, who has helped me with Raymond's estate, and my own will, and various small matters over the decades. I told her everything. I asked her what my rights were. She was clear. The house was mine, in my name alone, and would remain mine for as long as I chose. No one could take it from me without my consent. No legal action had been taken against me, nor did I have any reason to believe it was imminent. But knowing my rights, having them stated plainly, gave me something I had not realized I'd been missing, a floor beneath my feet. I wrote Daniel a letter, not an email, a real letter, on paper, because some things deserve the permanence of paper. I told him that I loved him. I told him that would never change. I told him about the notebook, every entry, and what it represented, not just the changes to my house, but the gradual, quiet effort to make me feel like a guest in my own life. I told him I understood that Renata may have had ideas that she believed were sensible, and I was not going to call her a villain, because I don't know what is in another person's heart. But I told him that his silence, his knowing, and saying nothing, had hurt me in a way I would need time to recover from. I told him that this house was mine, that I intended to live in it for as long as I was able, that when the time came to make decisions about it, I would make those decisions myself, clearly and deliberately, and I would let him know. I told him I expected, from that point forward, to be treated with the dignity of a woman who owns her home, who manages her own life, and who does not need to be measured out of her own kitchen. I mailed the letter on a Tuesday. He called me that Sunday, as he always does. The conversation was quiet, careful, a little formal. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't fully understood what he'd been agreeing to. I don't know if that's entirely true. I think there are things we accept when we love someone that we might not accept otherwise. And I think Daniel had been accepting things from Renata that he knew, somewhere, weren't right. But he is my son, and I am his mother, and there is a long road between one difficult conversation and whatever comes next. I have not changed that. I will not. But I have changed this. I no longer assume that love comes without the need for limits. I have learned later than I should have, perhaps, that even the people who matter most to us can lose sight of where they end and we begin, and it is not unkind to remind them. It is, in fact, the most loving thing you can do, because without those limits, love becomes something else, something that slowly takes up all your space until there is nothing left of you inside your own life. Renata and I have not spoken since the day I found her in my kitchen with the measuring tape. I don't know if we will. I am open to it, if she is willing to come to it honestly. But I am not holding my breath, and I am not sad about that. What I am is here. I am here, in this house, in the armchair by the window with the winter light coming in at an angle that always makes me think of February mornings from 30 years ago. The blanket, my mother's blanket, blue and white squares, is back on the arm of the sofa where it belongs. The spice rack is alphabetical again. The mirror in the downstairs bathroom is back at the right height. I can see my own face when I look in that mirror. That matters more than I knew it would. Raymond's gloves are still on the hook by the back door. I haven't decided what to do with them yet. Maybe nothing. Maybe they stay there forever, which is fine with me. There is a kind of honoring in leaving things in the place where they belong. I think about what I would tell a woman who is where I was a year ago, handing over a key at her kitchen table, trusting that love is enough, believing that the people who say they care about you will always show it in ways you can recognize. I would tell her, trust your feelings when something feels wrong, not in a panicked way, not in an accusatory way, but enough to pay attention, write things down, know your rights, and remember that asking to be treated with dignity in your own home is not asking too much. It is the least that should be asked. I would tell her that loving someone and setting limits with someone are not opposites. You can do both at once. You must, sometimes. And I would tell her that a home is not just a building. It is the place where your life happened. It is the chair with the dent and the hook with the gloves and the blanket from the mother who is gone now. It is every Tuesday morning and every Sunday phone call and every season in the garden. And you do not give that up quietly. You don't give that up at all.